From the passionate banners reading "Refugees Welcome" 10 years ago, Irish people are now marching with protest slogans, "Ireland is full." What has happened to Dublin, the historic and beautiful capital, with its magnificent architecture, now full of tents that have mushroomed after the downpour of the immigration crisis? Will this immigrant haven become a future hotbed for anti-immigration riots? In today's video, Anywhere Diary explores the reasons behind the change in mindset in a country once considered a model of tolerance, as well as the crises that are now engulfing this once vibrant and inclusive nation. Once a beacon of hope for refugees, Ireland's reputation as a welcoming nation is slowly unraveling. While tensions have been simmering for years, a recent tragic incident involving children in Southport has ignited a firestorm of anti-immigrant sentiment. To better understand the current outcome, we must go back in time to the 1800s. Ireland's history is inextricably linked to migration. A population once as high as 8 million was decimated by the Great Famine of 1845 to 1849, forcing millions to flee the country. The country's emigration rate skyrocketed to the second highest in Europe, reducing Ireland's population to just 4.4 million at one point. Today, as a result of emigration, hundreds of thousands of Irish people live outside their homeland, and millions of citizens of other countries are of Irish descent. This shared experience of displacement has historically shaped Ireland's open-door policy. In the 1990s, the number of immigrants to Ireland exceeded the number of emigrations from this country. New immigrants included a large number of Irish Americans returning home. These newcomers, often skilled workers and highly educated individuals, contributed significantly to Ireland's economic growth and cultural diversity. Despite having experienced many large and small immigrations in the past, surprisingly, for the first time since 1851, during the Great Famine, the Republic of Ireland's population exceeded 5 million people in 2022, a tremendous growth from fewer than 4 million in 2002. One of the factors that caused this number to skyrocket was the European immigration crisis in 2015 and the wars in many surrounding areas over the past decade. However, at the beginning of the 2015 immigration crisis, the Irish people still had a very tolerant and supportive view, with 88% of Irish people expressing some level of sympathy for refugees, from Syria to Ireland. This was the highest figure among the 12 European countries that participated that year. Because of the background and good reputation that Ireland brought to immigrants, it inadvertently turned into the country's later immigration crisis. The ongoing global conflicts and the EU's open border policy have placed immense strain on the island nation, threatening to erode its democratic foundations. Besides, the European Union has established a system of regulations and agreements to manage the flow of migrants, with the Dublin Convention being one of its main pillars. According to this convention, the responsibility for processing an asylum application lies with the first EU member state that the asylum seeker enters. To share the burden, the EU has implemented resettlement programs, requiring member states, including Ireland, to collectively accept a portion of these asylum seekers. Therefore, although Ireland is not the first destination for many migrants, it is still affected by the EU's common regulations and has an obligation to contribute to addressing the migration crisis. Not surprisingly, as the number of refugees seeking asylum continues to rise, Ireland is grappling with the challenges of integration and the growing discontent of its citizens. As a result, after 7 years, the proportion of people feeling that immigration is a concern has increased from 4% to 29%, becoming the biggest issue for voters, followed by housing and health. Since the 2015 migration crisis, Europe has been grappling with a complex interplay of humanitarian needs and nationalist concerns. Restrictive immigration policies and the rise of the far right have fueled tensions across the continent. While Ireland has historically maintained a more welcoming stance, recent years have seen a growing strain on its resources and social cohesion. It must be mentioned first that the escalating conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe have driven millions of people from their homes. The Syrian and Afghan wars, as well as humanitarian crises in Yemen, South Sudan, and Libya, have sparked a significant wave of migration towards Europe. More recently, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has generated an unprecedented influx of refugees, including many seeking sanctuary in Ireland. The sudden surge of refugees has overwhelmed Ireland's capacity to provide adequate housing and support services. As public frustration has grown, public protests, mostly peaceful and civilized, but also passionate, have erupted, calling for a balanced approach that protects both the rights of refugees and the interests of the local population. However, a disturbing trend has emerged: a series of arson attacks targeting refugee accommodation, including a hotel housing over 100 individuals in late 2018. Since then, nearly 30 fires have occurred across the country, with 9 of them in Dublin alone, following the 12,300 asylum applications in Ireland in 2023. But the most shocking event to unfold in Ireland in recent years was the violent anti-government riots that erupted in late 2023. The unrest was triggered by a tragic knife attack at a school, which injured 3 children and 2 adults. Misinformation claiming the attacker was an illegal immigrant quickly spread, igniting a wave of anti-immigrant sentiment. However, it was later revealed that the perpetrator was an Irish citizen of Algerian descent who had resided in Ireland for 2 decades. Far-right groups exploited the situation, inciting violence against immigrants. The riots, which involved arson, looting, and clashes with police, caused widespread damage and disruption. Protesters set fire to cars, attacked public transport, and looted shops in central Dublin. Social media was flooded with calls for violence against foreigners, and an estimated 500 people participated in the riots. Irish police described the events as the most violent in Dublin's modern history, surpassing the 2006 riots in terms of both scale and destruction. The estimated damage caused by the riots is believed to be as high as €20 million. In response to a chaotic situation that rarely occurs in the country, the Irish government responded strongly, with Minister for Justice Helen McEntee stating that those involved in violent actions would be dealt with severely. More than 30 people have been arrested in connection with the riots. This event also presents a significant challenge for the government in addressing tensions and social unrest related to immigration issues. In addition, Ireland's housing crisis, particularly in major cities like Dublin, has reached a critical point. The situation has been further compounded by the ongoing war in Ukraine, which has forced over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees to seek shelter in Ireland. The government has openly acknowledged its inability to accommodate all asylum seekers while their applications are being processed. This has led to a humanitarian crisis, with a makeshift tent city emerging near the International Protection Office in Dublin. Tensions have escalated as protesters have resorted to arson, targeting the refugee tents and clashing with police. Far-right groups have capitalized on the housing shortage to fuel anti-immigrant sentiment, exacerbating an already volatile situation. The consequences of this immigration crisis have not only tarnished the image of a magnificent capital, filled with makeshift tents, resembling a homeless corner in New York. The demand for housing has skyrocketed, yet the supply falls short, even for the local population. Rents in Ireland have surged dramatically, with the housing shortage felt most acutely in the capital city of Dublin, home to about a quarter of the population, in a country of just over 5 million people. Currently, rental prices in Ireland increased by 82%, far exceeding the EU average of 18%, according to a lobbying group from the Irish Banking and Payments Federation. Recent anti-immigrant riots in Dublin reflect the public's frustration as they struggle to afford housing costs, exposing to the world the deep fissures that the housing crisis has caused. Not stopping there, the impact of widespread immigration in the government's soft policies also brings fierce competition to the labour market, as well as overloading the demand for local public services, increasing the price of raw materials. The influx of immigrants from diverse countries has significantly altered Ireland's demographic landscape. These newcomers bring with them a rich tapestry of cultures, traditions, and customs, leading to a decline in the cultural homogeneity that once characterized the nation. As a result, major cities like Dublin and Cork have transformed into multicultural hubs, with a strong presence of various ethnic communities. This cultural shift has raised concerns among some segments of Irish society, about the erosion of traditional Irish identity, encompassing values, language, Irish Gaelic, folk music, festivals, and customs. People may feel a sense of cultural loss as these distinctive elements become less prominent in everyday life. In contrast to culturalisation, the Irish government has a fairly homogeneous multi-party system. Ireland is historically known for its political neutrality and lack of a strong far-right presence, and Ireland has maintained a relatively stable ideological landscape. However, recent years have witnessed a growing discontent with the government, particularly on issues such as immigration, housing, and social policies. This dissatisfaction has created fertile ground for the emergence of far-right groups and movements. Unlike mainstream parties, these far-right groups often lack formal political structures, operating primarily on social media or as local organisations. They frequently focus on anti-immigration rhetoric and the preservation of national identity. For another example, Ireland's recovery from the economic crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic has left some citizens feeling neglected by the government. They perceive a disproportionate focus on immigrants and welfare programs while grappling with rising housing costs, unemployment, and other economic challenges. Capitalising on this discontent, far-right movements have emerged, criticising the government and traditional political parties for failing to represent the interests of the native Irish population. Recognising that tensions would worsen without strong policies, the Irish government has gradually taken more decisive actions regarding the influx of refugees and immigrants. Ireland's voluntary return programme, managed by the International Organisation for Migration, IOM, encourages refugees and undocumented immigrants to return home voluntarily. Those who opt for this programme may receive financial assistance, travel support, and reintegration help upon returning to their homeland. However, in keeping with Ireland's traditionally compassionate image, the government focuses on facilitating humane and voluntary repatriation, rather than resorting to coercive measures like deportation. Additionally, for asylum seekers who do not meet the eligibility requirements, Ireland has a policy of deporting these individuals. However, this process must comply with EU human rights standards and the Geneva Convention. The Immigration, Residence and Protection Bill, currently under consideration, aims to introduce stricter regulations on immigration and repatriation, including accelerating the deportation process for those not qualifying for asylum. Furthermore, one immigration tightening measure that Ireland has implemented is restricting family reunification rights for those granted refugee status or international protection. This means refugees will face more difficulties in bringing their families to settle in Ireland. Instead of issuing indefinite residency permits to refugees, the government has shortened the residency period and is now reviewing permits on a regular basis. This allows the authorities to reassess a refugee's status and determine whether they still require international protection. It is clear that Ireland has made changes to tighten control over immigration, a challenge the country may not have fully anticipated the consequences of. In fact, since the far right in Ireland has not yet developed into a strong political force like in the Netherlands or the UK, the government must quickly address the underlying tensions and grievances among certain segments of the population that oppose immigration through violence and destruction. Ultimately, the ideology and actions of its people reflect the true character of the country. Whether Ireland can maintain its positive image in the future will largely depend on government intervention. Ireland was once a dream destination for many immigrants around the world, and the country itself had warmly welcomed international friends to its land. However, in the current delicate situation, with the risk that the number of immigrants could even surpass that of the native population, tolerance now has to give way to concerns over the living rights and national values of its citizens. So what about you? What do you think about Ireland's change in the current immigration crisis, and do you predict their future will improve? Please comment below so everyone can know. If you found this video insightful, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on our latest content. Don't forget to ring the bell for instant notifications. Your support fuels our passion for creating meaningful content. Thank you for watching.